Hey football fans, and welcome back. Today we're tackling the Indianapolis Colts, one of the more interesting teams going into the 2025 season, and that's mostly because there is the specter of a lame duck season on the horizon, though it is definitely far from guaranteed, to be clear about this. Whether you're a Colts fan or not, and obviously I'm not, I'm a Jaguars fan, and as a Jaguars fan, I'm obligated to despise the Indianapolis Colts, especially after what they did to the Jaguars with the Peyton Manning era. So there's that. But the Colts are in a really peculiar position because they're switching ownership. Their former owner, Jim Irsay, just passed away. New ownership, his daughters are now sort of running the show. So there's that going on. They have a long-time GM at this point. By NFL standards, Chris Ballard has been around for a while. I believe the 2017 season was his first as the Colts GM. And since then, the Colts have struggled to find any kind of stability at the most important position, the quarterback position. And it's shown on the on-field results. And now the Colts have kind of done it all. They've done the whole trying the retread thing with whether it was Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, to some degrees of success. And now they've tried the high draft pick thing with Anthony Richardson, and that looks like it really hasn't panned out. He struggled to stay healthy. He's come under a lot of scrutiny, especially after that incident last season where he took himself out of the game because of being tired. There's just something that you don't really see an NFL quarterback do. So he's under a lot of scrutiny on top of his on-field performance just hasn't been good enough for the Colts to be a successful football team. All that being said, though, they've still been close to that midline. They've been under Shane Steichen, I believe, 9-8 and then 8-9. So they're right at that 500 mark for the last couple of seasons. So this is going to be a big year determining what the Colts look like moving forward. Now, the reality is going into this season, the Houston Texans are expected to win the AFC South. The Titans are in full-blown rebuild mode. I don't think there's a whole lot of pundits out there that are giving the Titans a lot of shot at winning the division. The Jaguars are interesting because they could be anywhere from the best team in the division all the way to the absolute worst team in the division and possibly anywhere in between. It's really hard to predict where the Jaguars are going to be. The Colts, I think most expect them to be a competitive team, but I don't know if being just competitive and missing the playoffs is going to be enough to save everyone's job. And where it gets really interesting to me is with Chris Ballard as the GM of the Colts. It's really hard for a GM to keep their job long-term when their team isn't making the playoffs regularly, as well as having quarterback instability, which is basically where the Colts currently are. They've not been able to find a long-term answer at quarterback. They've been spinning their wheels there for years and years and years. And with new ownership, as much as I like Shane Steichen, I actually think he's probably a really good fit moving forward. It's always one of those things when you switch GMs, a lot of times that new GM is gonna want their own guy as the head coach if that's sort of the structure the franchise goes with. So if Ballard gets fired, I don't know that Shane Steichen would survive as the Colts head coach, even though finding a quarterback isn't really in his job description. And don't get me wrong, I know that he's responsible for developing a quarterback, and you could make the argument that Shane Steichen has failed a little bit there so far, along with Anthony Richardson. Anyways, we haven't seen Richardson develop into a franchise quarterback that can carry the team for years to come, but it's also early. We expect a lot from quarterbacks very early in their careers, so it's very plausible that someone as physically gifted as Anthony Richardson could still grow into a good NFL quarterback. And that's kind of where Daniel Jones, I think in theory, comes into play here. Maybe the idea is that he can either mentor Richardson or even be the top quarterback for a time in Indianapolis until Richardson is ready. Because if you remember, one of the huge knocks on Anthony Richardson was always that he just hasn't had that much game experience in college. And then in the pros, he struggled to stay healthy. So maybe a little bit of time carrying a clipboard on the sideline could do him good. The problem is, I don't know that time is on this franchise's side right now when it comes to the quarterbacks surviving over the next few years, as well as the front office, as well as the coaching staff. it feels like the Colts need to be expecting to win sooner rather than later, which is why I don't know that this all pans out very well. So there's a lot of scenarios out there right now as to what could happen with the Colts. The preferable one, if you're a Colts fan, obviously they make the playoffs. And if they make the playoffs, at least the coaching staff, the front office, that's all going to be safe, because ultimately that's what every franchise is trying to do on a yearly basis, is get themselves into the show and give themselves a chance to make a run at the Super Bowl. So if the playoffs are made, the Colts are good. Now, at quarterback, it is really hard to see the Colts making the playoffs with Anthony Richardson if he plays at the level he has been playing at. So it's got to be really interesting to see whether the Colts start the season starting Richardson or whether they go with Daniel Jones. And if they start doing that flip-flop thing, I think that's kind of the end. I don't see a way that's successful. The second possibility is that, and this is kind of the one that I expect to be the case, the Colts are a competitive team week in and week out, but they miss the playoffs by a game, 2, or maybe even 3 games. They're sort of in that middle tier of the NFL where they're not quite a playoff team, but they definitely on any given Sunday can play with almost any team in the league. And if they have good quarterback play, I think they're actually a better roster than that. But I think even with Daniel Jones playing some of his better football, it's likely the Colts are going to be somewhat inconsistent there. And with inconsistency at quarterback play, you're probably going to struggle to make the playoffs. So I think the likelihood is that the Colts are going to be kind of in the middle with a good roster, but just without great quarterback play, or even probably what we would call good quarterback play. I think they're going to be pretty inconsistent. And then, of course, the nightmare scenario, the one that gets everyone fired, is where they spiral. Maybe they're swapping quarterbacks back and forth and can't find a combination that works. Maybe things fall apart because of injury early in the season, but if they finish like 6 wins or worse, I don't think anyone survives that as far as the front office or the coaching staff goes. If Anthony Richardson is apparent that he is not the answer, and if it's apparent that Daniel Jones is not the answer, and if it looks like the roster has regressed elsewhere, it seems likely that with new ownership, even though it's still in the family, with new ownership, you would expect them to just sort of hit the reset button and try again at that point, because no one on the team is getting any younger. No one on the team is getting cheaper as time goes along. So it's hard to see the Colts continuing down the current path if they end up as a 6-win-ish or worse team. If they're in that middle ground, it could break either way, and no one really knows the temperament of new ownership and sort of what they're going to favor. Are they going to favor that long-term stability and just stick in what they already have, or are they going to turn it into a turnstile of front offices as well as head coaches? The reality is we just don't know until it all plays out, at least for a little while, till we can get a feel for what the new ownership is going to look like, whereas Jim Irsay, almost to a fault sometimes, stuck with his guys. He was a very loyalty-driven owner when it comes to that. So we don't know what the new ownership is going to look like when it comes to how long they're going to stick with a formula that seemingly isn't quite working. So if you're a Colts fan out there and you're watching this, I would actually love to know your take. You probably know the team. You're a little bit better than I do. I do follow the Colts, obviously being an in-division rival of the Jaguars. I do keep tabs on the Colts, but I definitely don't know the Colts like their own fans do. So I'm very curious, what are the strengths of the roster that you see? What are the weaknesses? How do you see the season playing out? And admittedly, I have a bias against the Colts. Colts fans probably have a bias for optimism, just like I do with really being optimistic about the Jaguars. So I would love the take and try to remove any bias that you may have and be as objective as possible, because it could be a really interesting conversation to be had down in those comments. And otherwise, if you're interested in AFC South talk, NFL talk, as we get into preseason, taking a look at specific games, specific instances, things that play out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. I'm Shane, and I will see you all in the next video.